Picture yourself waking up in a world without clocks, no ticking hands, no digital displays, no alarms to structure your day. Your only guides are the slow arc of the sun overhead and the silent, steady rotation of the stars. For the great desert empires that once flourished across the Sahara and the Arabian Peninsula, this was not some distant fantasy, it was daily life. These were societies that thrived for centuries without ever dividing time into hours or minutes as we know them, yet they mastered the art of measuring time with a sophistication that still inspires awe today. They became the true clockmakers of the desert, visionaries who read time in the shifting sands, the length of a shadow, the position of a constellation. In some of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, where survival depended on precision and foresight, they turned observation into innovation. They didn't just tell time, they woven it into the fabric of their existence, using the heavens above and the earth below to organize everything from sacred rituals and lunar festivals to trade caravans that crossed vast, empty seas of sand. What's truly remarkable is how much we can learn from their relationship with time. In an age where we're surrounded by technology yet often feel ruled by the clock, their story is a powerful reminder of human adaptability and creativity. Over the course of this journey, we'll explore how these cultures tracked celestial movements, engineered shadow-based devices, and built entire systems of life and governance around natural rhythms. You'll see how time was lived, not just counted, and how, even without gears or pendulums, they achieved something profound: harmony with the world around them. So settle in and let's step into their world, a world where time was written in light and shadow, sand and stars. Out in the vast, shimmering expanse of the desert, the environment itself was the first and most reliable clock. Imagine standing in the middle of the Sahara or the Arabian Peninsula, a seemingly endless sea of sand and rock under a boundless sky. In such a place, the sun is not just a source of light and heat, it is a relentless, moving marker. Its journey from horizon to horizon was the most fundamental way to structure the day. The position of the sun overhead told you when the heat was at its most dangerous, a signal to seek shade, and its descent promised the relief of cooler evening air. But the sun was only part of the story. As daylight faded, a completely different timepiece emerged, one far more precise and detailed: the night sky. In the crystal clear, dry desert air, free from the haze and light pollution we know today, the stars shone with an incredible, piercing brightness. For the people living there, these weren't just random points of light, they were a familiar, rotating map. Constellations like Orion or the tight cluster of the Pleiades were as recognizable as landmarks on a trail. Their slow, predictable sweep across the heavens divided the night into reliable segments, guiding nocturnal travel and marking the passage of the seasons. During the day, you didn't need a sophisticated device to tell time. You just had to look down. A simple rock or even your own body would cast a shadow, and the changing length and angle of that shadow became a natural sundial. In the early morning, shadows stretched long towards the west. By midday, they shrank to a small pool around the base of an object. Then, as the afternoon wore on, they would steadily lengthen again towards the east. This daily dance of light and dark was a constant visual rhythm everyone could read. This intimate knowledge extended to the broader cycles of the year as well. People noticed subtle shifts. The exact point on the horizon where the sun rose would change gradually each day. In the summer, it rose and set further to the north, bringing longer, hotter days. In the winter, its path shifted to the south, resulting in shorter, cooler days. These seasonal changes were absolutely critical for survival. They dictated when to plant hardy crops in an oasis, when to expect rare rains, and when it was time to move livestock to new grazing grounds. This wasn't abstract knowledge. It was essential information that meant the difference between prosperity and disaster. Living in such an unforgiving environment forced a profound connection with these natural cycles. There was no room for error. This necessity, the sheer need to predict, to plan, and to be precise is what sparked the initial innovations in timekeeping. By first learning to read the world around them with such acute observation, these desert societies laid the essential groundwork for all the more complex and ingenious devices that would follow. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the desert cooled, an even more precise and magnificent clock face emerged above. The night sky, in its absolute clarity, became a dynamic map and a cosmic calendar. For cultures like the Bedouins of Arabia and the Tuareg of the Sahara, this wasn't just a beautiful spectacle. It was their library, their GPS, and their sacred text all rolled into one. They didn't merely look at the stars, they read them with a fluency born of necessity and reverence. Constellations were their chapter headings. The brilliant belt of Orion, known to many Bedouin tribes as Al-Jabbar, the giant, wasn't just a random pattern. Its position in the sky signaled crucial changes. When it first became visible in the pre-dawn hours, it heralded the coming of the cooler winter months. The delicate cluster of the Pleiades, often called Al-Thuraya, held even greater significance. Its annual heliacal rising, its first appearance just before sunrise after a period of invisibility, was a pivotal event across the desert world. For some, it marked the start of the new year and the beginning of the rainy season. For others, it was the signal to prepare for the date harvest or to schedule the movement of camel herds to new pastures. This wasn't vague folklore, it was precise, repeatable astronomy. The moon completed this celestial trio. Its 29.5-day cycle from slender crescent to full orb and back again structured the month, governing everything from the timing of important trade fairs to the rhythms of social and spiritual life. This knowledge was far too vital to be left to chance or written in books that could be lost. Instead, it was woven into the very fabric of culture through oral tradition. Expert astronomers, often the most respected elders, passed down their understanding through intricate poetry and vivid stories. Complex astronomical relationships were memorized through couplets where the movement of one star was tied to the behavior of an animal or the blooming of a specific plant. A line of poetry might describe how the setting of a certain star coincided with the mating season of the oryx, telling a listener exactly when to expect this event. This method of encoding data was genius. It was memorable, portable, and resilient, ensuring that critical survival information was preserved across countless generations without a single piece of paper. The application of this star law was both intensely practical and deeply spiritual. A caravan leader setting out across the empty quarter of the Rub al-Khali would navigate by keeping specific stars at a constant angle to his line of travel, a technique that allowed for remarkably straight paths across trackless dunes. The timing of these journeys was itself dictated by the stars, ensuring travel during cooler months and avoiding the deadly summer heat. Simultaneously, the same stars that guided a merchant also dictated the timing of sacred ceremonies and periods of truce between tribes. The sky provided a universal, impartial rhythm that ordered all aspects of existence, creating a shared sense of time that connected the practical needs of the body with the profound longings of the spirit. In this way, the desert peoples lived in a constant, harmonious dialogue with the cosmos, their lives a silent, graceful dance timed to the music of the spheres. Building directly on that deep celestial knowledge, these desert cultures began to engineer time, moving from pure observation to creating the world's first portable, reproducible timekeeping devices. The simplest and most universal of these was the gnomon. In its most basic form, a gnomon is just a vertical object, a stick planted firmly in the ground, a spear stood on end, or even a permanent stone pillar. Its genius lies in its utter simplicity and its direct conversation with the sun. As the sun moves across the sky, the shadow cast by the gnomon doesn't just sit there. It sweeps around the object in a predictable daily arc, its length shrinking and growing with the sun's altitude. The geometry behind it is elegant. In the early morning, when the sun is low on the eastern horizon, the shadow is long and points west. As the sun climbs to its highest point at midday, the shadow shrinks to its shortest possible length, often pointing directly north in the northern hemisphere. Then, as the sun descends in the afternoon, the shadow lengthens again, this time pointing east. By carefully observing and marking the tip of this moving shadow throughout the day, one could divide the daylight into clear, measurable segments. This was the foundational principle of the sundial, a technology that would be refined for millennia. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to monumentalize this concept. Their towering obelisks, often sheathed in gleaming electrum, were not just symbols of pharaonic power. They were giant city-center gnomons. The sweeping shadows they cast across temple precincts and public squares provided a communal time reference for an entire population, marking the passing hours for priests, officials, and laborers alike. These stone needles were precisely aligned and their shadow paths studied to denote not just time of day, but also important solar events like the solstices, when the shadow's length would reach its annual maximum or minimum. Centuries later and further east, Islamic scholars and engineers perfected the gnomon for a new, specific purpose, organizing the daily rhythm of prayer. In Islam, the 5 daily prayers are defined by the sun's position Fajr at dawn, Dhuhr when the sun passes its zenith, Asr in the afternoon, Maghrib at sunset, and Isha at nightfall. Determining the exact moment for Dhuhr and Asr, in particular, required precision. Islamic astronomers developed highly sophisticated horizontal sundials, often engraved on marble slabs or built into the courtyards of mosques. These featured carefully calculated lines and curves that accounted for the sun's changing path throughout the year. A dedicated timekeeper, called the muwakkit, would use these instruments to determine the exact prayer times and then signal the call to prayer, ensuring the entire community was synchronized in its worship. This evolution from a simple stick in the sand to a calibrated scientific instrument represents a crucial intellectual leap. It marks the moment humanity began to abstract time from the environment and impose a human-designed structure upon it. The shadow clock was a bridge. It took the raw, natural data provided by the sun and translated it into an engineered system of measurement. This shift set the essential conceptual stage for every timekeeping invention that would follow, proving that even the most ephemeral thing, a shadow, could be harnessed to bring order and meaning to human life. But the sun, for all its reliability, had one obvious and significant limitation. It set each evening, taking its shadows with it. The night sky, while a magnificent guide, offered a different kind of time, one better for marking seasons and navigation than for measuring the precise passage of a single night. For the complex needs of growing empires, a more consistent and controllable method was needed, one that could function independent of the weather or the time of day. This necessity led to one of history's most fascinating paradoxes: the widespread use of water clocks in the middle of the world's driest landscapes. In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, a region often defined by its arid plains and dependence on its great rivers, the clepsydra, or water clock, became an instrument of profound importance. Imagine a simple ceramic vessel, carefully shaped and fired, with a small, precision-drilled hole near its base. This vessel would be filled with water, which would then slowly, inexorably, drip out into a second container. The key to its timekeeping was in that steady, regulated flow. By marking lines on the inside of the receiving vessel, or by watching a float descend as the water level dropped in the first, these cultures could measure the passage of time with remarkable consistency, whether the sun was blazing overhead or the moon was hidden behind clouds. The applications of this technology were critical to the functioning of sophisticated society. In the halls of justice, a water clock could ensure that both the accuser and the accused were given an equal and fair amount of time to plead their case, preventing long-winded speeches from dragging proceedings out indefinitely. During nightly religious vigils, priests could use the gentle dripping to mark the correct intervals for specific prayers and rituals, maintaining a sacred schedule even in the deepest darkness. For court astronomers, tracking the movements of planets and stars required noting their positions at fixed intervals throughout the night. The clepsydra provided the steady, unwavering beat to which their celestial observations could be synchronized. What makes their use in desert and near-desert regions so astonishing is the inherent contradiction they represent. Water was and remains the most precious commodity in these climates, a resource so vital that wars were fought over it, and survival often depended on its careful conservation. To willingly pour this life-giving substance into a device, knowing it would slowly leak away, seems almost counterintuitive. Yet, this very act underscores the immense value these cultures placed on time itself. The measurement of time was not a frivolous luxury. It was a pillar of civilization, so essential that it was worth a calculated expenditure of their most valuable resource. The ingenuity poured into the design of these clocks was a direct response to this paradox. Craftsmen became masters of hydraulics, carefully calibrating the size of the outflow hole and the shape of the vessel to ensure a constant flow rate, minimizing waste while maximizing accuracy. Some advanced designs even used multiple jars in a series or incorporated floating indicators on a scale to create more complex and precise timekeeping systems. This was technology born of absolute necessity, a brilliant solution to the problem of measuring the immutable flow of time using the very substance that symbolized life and scarcity in their world. While the steady drip of water clocks and the sweeping shadows of gnomons measured the hours, another celestial body governed a broader, more profound rhythm of life, the moon. Its gentle, predictable cycle from darkness to full brilliance and back again became the heartbeat of desert societies, giving rise to the lunar calendar, a system so intuitive and powerful it shaped everything from commerce to culture. Unlike our modern solar calendar tethered to the 465-day journey around the sun, the lunar calendar is a deeply human-scale timekeeper. It is based on the 29.5 days it takes for the moon to complete its phases, a cycle visible to anyone who simply looks up at the night sky. For the pre-Islamic Arabs, this lunar rhythm was the very framework of existence. Each month began not with a date on a page, but with the thrilling, community-verified sighting of the faintest sliver of a new crescent moon low in the twilight sky. The announcement that the new moon had been seen would spread like wildfire from hilltop to hilltop, from tribe to tribe, officially starting a new cycle. And these months were not just numbered, they were named, and their names were a direct reflection of life in the desert. There was Rabi al-Awwal, which means the first spring, signaling the end of the harsh winter and the arrival of rains that would bring a fleeting bloom to the land. Then came Jumada, a name derived from the word for to freeze, hearkening back to a time when water would still ice over in the coldest part of the year. And perhaps most critically, there was Ramadan, the month of scorching heat, which later became the sacred month of fasting. These names transformed the calendar from a mere tracking system into a narrative, a story of the annual struggle and triumph of survival against the elements. This lunar system created a beautifully flexible yet universally understood sense of time. It synchronized the entire region, knowing that tribes hundreds of miles away were also beginning the month of harvesting, or the month of safe travel, allowed for the coordination of massive annual events. The most famous of these were the sacred months, during which warfare was forbidden by custom and a universal truce allowed for great trade fairs. The most important fair was held at Ukaz. During these holy months, merchants, poets, and tribes from all over the peninsula would journey in peace to meet, exchange goods, settle disputes, and compete in legendary poetry competitions. The lunar calendar didn't just mark time. It created the safe, shared temporal space necessary for commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange to flourish, binding a vast and often fractious region together with a common rhythm. Yet, this elegant system had one significant quirk. A lunar year of 12 months is only about 354 days long, falling roughly 11 days short of the solar year. This means that over time, the lunar months slowly drift through the seasons. A month named for the spring rains might eventually find itself occurring in the dead of summer. To correct for this and keep their agricultural and seasonal activities roughly aligned with the actual climate, some cultures employed a practice known as intercalation. This involved periodically adding an extra 13th month to the year to resynchronize the lunar calendar with the solar cycle. The pre-Islamic Arabs were known to do this, though the decision of when to add this month was often a contentious one, sometimes influenced by political as much as by astronomical considerations. This invites a powerful reflection. In our world of perfectly synchronized atomic clocks and universal coordinated time, we rarely experience this kind of temporal drift. But can you imagine a different relationship with time, one where the months themselves are in a gentle, constant dance with the seasons? This drifting calendar meant that the experience of a month like Ramadan, for instance, would slowly journey through all the seasons of the year over a 33-year cycle. The challenges and character of a fast would be different in the blistering heat of summer than in the short, cool days of winter. This created a deeply personal and generational connection to the passage of time. Your grandfather might have described fasting in the winter, while you endured it in the summer, and your grandchildren would again know it in the cold. It was a system that wove the community together not just across space, but across generations, creating a cultural identity that was both fluid and enduring, all measured by the silent, cycling face of the moon. While the moon governed the months, the sun dictated the grand, sweeping narrative of the year, and desert cultures developed remarkably sophisticated methods to track its annual journey. This wasn't about telling the hour of the day, but about predicting the very turning points of the seasons, the solstices and equinoxes, events that held the keys to survival. They achieved this not with complex machinery, but by turning their entire landscape into a giant astronomical instrument, carefully aligning rocks, monuments, and even their own art to capture the sun's most dramatic moments. Consider the incredible Nabatean city of Petra, carved directly into the rose-red cliffs of southern Jordan. While famous for its breathtaking tombs, it also contains a fascinating solar marker known as Ad-Dar, or the monastery. This massive, intricately carved facade isn't just a monument to the dead. It's a precision-engineered solar observatory. On the day of the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the main entrance gate of the city, and its rays are funneled through the narrow, sick canyon to strike specific, sacred points. This dramatic event, which would have been witnessed by priests and rulers, signaled the sun's symbolic rebirth and the slow, promised return of longer days, a moment of profound hope and a cue to prepare for the coming agricultural cycle. Further west, across the vast expanse of the Sahara, other cultures left a different kind of record. Ancient pastoralists created vast galleries of rock art, etching and painting scenes of daily life, animals, and hunting onto stone canvases. But many of these sites, like those at Jabrin in Oman or certain locations in the Tassili-Ennaja range, are more than just art galleries. They are solar calendars in plain sight. Researchers have discovered that specific carvings, a spiral here, a deeply gouged cupule there, are positioned so that on the equinoxes, when day and night are of equal length, a sliver of sunlight pierces a nearby rock fissure to land directly upon the mark. This fleeting moment of illumination, perhaps lasting only a few minutes, would have been a powerful, communal confirmation that the seasons were turning on schedule, a signal to begin preparing for migration or to initiate ceremonies of balance and thanksgiving. This deep solar knowledge was the ultimate tool for proactive survival. By pinpointing the solstices, a community knew exactly when the punishing heat of summer would peak and begin to wane, or when the bitter cold of desert nights would be at its most intense before gradually relenting. The equinoxes, those 2 days of perfect balance, were likely times for important social and economic activities, setting out on trading caravans, negotiating treaties between tribes, or holding large communal gatherings and markets. These events required precise timing to ensure safe travel and the assembly of people from great distances. What's truly striking is the blend of pure empirical science and rich cultural tradition. The same elder who could calculate the solstice by watching the shadow of a specific mountain peak might also be the one to lead a ceremony celebrating the sun god's journey. The knowledge was practical, but its application was sacred. This seamless integration shows us that for these societies, understanding the cosmos wasn't a separate academic pursuit. It was a fundamental part of their identity, a way of weaving the immense, impersonal cycles of the universe directly into the intimate fabric of human ritual and community life. They didn't just observe the sun, they conversed with it, using the silent language of stone and shadow to maintain a harmonious relationship with the forces that governed their world. While water clocks provided a continuous flow to mark the night, another ingenious device harnessed the desert's most plentiful resource to measure time with remarkable reliability: the sand hourglass. Imagine the challenge of tracking a short, fixed interval in a world without minutes. How did a ship's captain ensure his crew changed watch at the right moment during a long Red Sea voyage? How could a market official guarantee that each merchant received an equal allot of time to sell their goods at a crowded oasis fair? The answer often lay in a simple yet brilliant contraption: 2 glass bulbs connected by a narrow neck, through which a stream of fine sand poured in a perfectly steady, predictable trickle. What made the hourglass so perfectly suited to desert life was its elegant immunity to the environment. A water clock, or clepsydra, was vulnerable to the very conditions it operated in. In the scorching heat, water could evaporate, subtly altering the water level and thus the timekeeping accuracy. In the cold of a desert night, that same water could freeze, bringing the entire mechanism to a complete halt. Sand, however, was impervious to these extremes. It flowed at the same rate whether under the blazing noon sun or in the chill of midnight, making it a fantastically dependable medium for measurement in an unpredictable climate. This reliability was a game changer, especially for critical, time-sensitive activities where consistency was paramount. The construction of an accurate hourglass was, however, a masterclass in artisanal skill and scientific understanding. It was far more complex than simply filling a glass with beach sand. The material itself had to be meticulously prepared. Common desert sand was often too coarse and irregular, leading to clogs and inconsistent flow. Craftsmen would seek out specific types of fine-grained sand, like marble dust or pulverized eggshells, which offered a smooth, even consistency. This material was then sieved repeatedly to achieve a uniform grain size, washed to remove any dust that could cause friction, and sometimes even baked to ensure it was completely devoid of moisture. The glass bulbs themselves required immense skill to blow into perfectly symmetrical shapes, ensuring that the volume of sand in the upper bulb was identical every time it was inverted. The most critical element was the calibration of the neck. The tiny passage between the two bulbs, often made of a metal diaphragm with a precision drilled hole, determined the flow rate. Artisans would spend hours testing and adjusting, adding or removing grains of sand until the device measured its intended interval, be it one turn of the watch, the duration of a prayer, or a merchant's slot at the market, with unwavering accuracy. This transformation of a ubiquitous, almost worthless material into a tool of precision is a powerful symbol of desert ingenuity. The very substance that could be a nuisance, blowing into tents and threatening to engulf caravans, was tamed and put to work in the service of order and structure. The hourglass became a quiet, reliable witness to the rhythms of daily life, its silent flow a tangible representation of time's passage, perfectly adapted from the resources that the harsh desert environment provided in abundance. If the hourglass was a triumph of material adaptation and the water clock a testament to ingenuity in the face of scarcity, then the astrolabe was nothing short of a masterpiece, a handheld model of the entire universe. This breathtakingly complex device, perfected by Islamic scholars during the golden age of science, represents the absolute pinnacle of pre-mechanical timekeeping. It was a portable observatory, a star chart, a prayer time calculator, and a navigation aid, all exquisitely crafted from brass and engraved with a web of mathematical precision. For the desert empires, whose scholars were often on the move between cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba, its portability was key. You could literally hold the cosmos in the palm of your hand, a tool that made the vast, abstract movements of the heavens instantly readable and practically applicable. At its heart, the astrolabe is a sophisticated calculator that translates the dome of the sky onto a flat, two-dimensional plane. The main body, called the mater or mother, is a hollow disk. Inside it, you slot carefully engraved plates, each one calibrated for a specific latitude. On top of that sits the retere, a complex, web-like star chart that rotates over the plate. The retere has pointers for the brightest stars, and the entire assembly is topped with a pivoting rule called the alidade. To use it, you would suspend the astrolabe by its ring, aim the alidade at a known star or at the sun itself, and then read the altitude from a scale on the rim. Once you had that measurement, you could rotate the retere to match the current positions of the stars above you. With everything aligned, the instrument became a functional snapshot of the sky at that exact moment, allowing you to solve dozens of problems. Its functions were almost magical in their range. A scholar could determine the precise time of day or night, calculate the direction to Mecca for prayer, find the altitude of a mountain, or even forecast the rising and setting times of the sun and stars for any date in the future. For navigators crossing the featureless desert or the open sea, it could provide an estimate of latitude by measuring the height of the pole star. It was the smartphone of its era, a single, elegant device that consolidated a library of astronomical knowledge and computational power into a beautiful, functional object. The level of mathematical understanding required to design the plates, which project the three-dimensional celestial sphere onto a two-dimensional surface using a technique called stereographic projection, is staggering. This was advanced spherical trigonometry made tangible and beautiful. A simpler, yet equally vital, instrument was the quadrant. Imagine a quarter circle of wood or metal with a scale of 90 degrees engraved along its curved edge. From the apex dangled a weighted plumb line. The user would sight a star or the sun along the top edge, and the plumb line would fall across the graduated scale, giving the object's altitude directly. While less versatile than the astrolabe, the quadrant was cheaper, easier to make, and incredibly accurate for specific observations. It became the workhorse tool for astronomers and timekeepers, essential for calibrating other instruments and for making the solar observations needed to determine prayer times like D, Hua, and Asa with absolute precision. The development of these instruments was driven by some of the greatest scientific minds of the medieval period. The Persian polymath al-Biruni, a scholar of immense curiosity and rigor, wrote extensively on the use of the astrolabe and quadrant. He once noted that the pursuit of astronomy and the perfection of these tools was not merely a scientific endeavor, but a form of worship, a way to better understand the divine order of the cosmos. His works, along with those of others like al-Zarqali in Al-Andalus, didn't just describe how to use these devices, they pushed the boundaries of their design, refining their accuracy and expanding their capabilities. This culture of innovation, supported by caliphs and sultans, turned timekeeping from a practical art into a rigorous science. What makes the astrolabe and quadrant so remarkable is their perfect fusion of form and function. They are not just scientific tools, they are works of art. The brass surfaces are often adorned with intricate engravings of geometric patterns, calligraphic inscriptions, and even poetic verses. Crafting one required the collaborative skills of a mathematician to perform the calculations, an astronomer to provide the data, and a master metalworker to execute the design with flawless precision. They represent a worldview where beauty, faith, and reason were inextricably linked, a handheld testament to the idea that to measure the world was to celebrate its wonder. But how did this precise, calculated time, measured by astrolabes and shadow clocks, make its way from the scholars and timekeepers to every single member of the community? In an age without personal watches or public clock towers, the answer lay in a powerful fusion of culture and ritual, transforming entire societies into living, breathing timepieces. The desert empires mastered the art of broadcasting time, using a universal language of sound and sight to synchronize the daily lives of thousands, weaving temporal order directly into the social fabric. The most iconic and enduring of these signals is the Islamic call to prayer, the Adhan. 5 times each day, from minarets rising above dusty oasis towns and bustling city centers, the voice of the muezzin would ring out. This was not a simple shout, it was a melodic, powerful chant that carried across the still desert air, reaching into every home and marketplace. Its timing was not arbitrary. Each call was determined by the precise solar calculations of the mosque's timekeeper, using those very instruments we just discussed. The dawn call, Fajr, marked the first faint light before sunrise, a signal to end the night's rest and prepare for the day. The Dihua call came when the sun reached its zenith and shadows began to lengthen again, a natural break in the workday. This human voice, rising and falling in a familiar cadence, was a constant, reassuring reminder of the time, a shared rhythm that paused commerce, guided devotion, and structured the entire day around a sacred schedule. It was a clock that everyone could hear, a communal alarm that required no batteries and never failed. Further south, in the great Sahelian empires like Mali and Songhai that bordered the Sahara's southern edge, a different but equally effective system thrived. Here, the primary time signal was not a voice but a drum. In these cultures, master drummers, known as griots, were the guardians of history and the arbiters of time. Using talking drums, instruments whose pitch and rhythm could mimic the tonal patterns of their languages, they could broadcast complex messages across vast distances. A specific drum pattern might announce the opening of the daily market at a time corresponding to a certain shadow length. Another, more urgent rhythm could summon council members for a meeting at the chief's compound. At night, a steady, slow beat might mark the changing of guards or the watchers of the night. The drum was a public address system, its language understood by all, ensuring that even those who could not see the central sundial or water clock were still operating on the same temporal page as the entire community. For coordinating across the truly vast and empty expanses between settlements, desert cultures turned to an even more dramatic method: fire and smoke. Along well-established trade routes, like the perilous paths crossing the empty quarter or the trails leading to mountain passes, watchtowers and high points were established. From these vantage points, sentinels would keep a constant watch. The sight of a distant caravan approaching, or more critically, the approach of raiders or a sudden sandstorm, would trigger a chain reaction of signal fires. A single column of smoke by day or a bright beacon by night could relay a simple message: danger, come, or halt, across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours, far faster than any messenger could travel. This visual telegraph system created a network of time-sensitive information that was crucial for the security and economic flow of the entire region, turning isolated communities into connected nodes in a vast, silent communication web. These practices did more than just tell people what to do and when. They forged a powerful sense of collective identity and social cohesion. When everyone in a city stops their activities at the same moment to face the same direction in prayer, or when an entire village understands that a particular drum pattern means it is time to gather at the elder's tree, time ceases to be a personal concern and becomes a shared experience. This created a powerful, unconscious rhythm to life, a communal pulse that everyone felt. The traditions and social structures themselves became the clockworks, with each person playing a part in maintaining the rhythm. It was a system built on trust, tradition, and shared understanding, proving that the most effective way to measure time is not just with gears and dials, but with the unified heartbeat of a community listening, watching, and moving together. For the merchants and nomads who dared to cross the world's great deserts, time was not an abstract concept. It was the single most critical factor separating a successful, lucrative journey from a catastrophic one. The vast, sun-scorched arteries of commerce like the Trans-Saharan routes and the Silk Road's desert branches were not highways. They were perilous gauntlets where a single miscalculation in timing could mean death for an entire caravan. In this environment, the sophisticated timekeeping of cities gave way to a more rugged, practical, and utterly essential form of temporal measurement, one dictated by the sun's brutality and the stars' cold guidance. These travelers did not think in terms of hours or minutes. Their unit of time was the stage or the march, the distance that could be covered in a single day's travel. But a day's travel was not a fixed measure. It was a fluid calculation that changed with the seasons, the terrain, and the endurance of the camels. The primary goal was to avoid the killing heat of the midday sun. A typical caravan's day began hours before dawn, in the profound cold and darkness of the desert night. Camels would be loaded by the light of the stars or a sliver of moon, their groans and the shouts of the drivers breaking the silence. They would set out, navigating by the familiar constellations overhead, making as much progress as possible during the coolest hours. The pivotal moment came with the first hint of light on the eastern horizon. This was the signal to start looking for a campsite, a place with some rock cover, perhaps a rare acacia tree for shade, or better yet, a known well. By the time the sun had fully risen and began to bake the land, the caravan would already be halted, tents pitched, and camels hobbled to rest. The entire scorching afternoon would be spent in forced inactivity, conserving energy and water. Then, as the shadows began to lengthen dramatically in the late afternoon, the camp would stir back to life. They would repack and set out again, traveling until the last vestiges of twilight had faded, squeezing every possible minute of movement from the tolerable parts of the day. This broken rhythm travel by night and early morning, rest during the inferno of midday, was a survival strategy etched in time itself. The coordination required for this was immense and fell to the caravan master, a figure of immense experience and authority. He was a living calculator, integrating multiple streams of temporal data. He used the altitude of specific stars not just for direction, but to judge the watch of the night. He read the lengthening shadow of his own camel to know when it was time to call the midday halt. His knowledge included a mental almanac of the sky, knowing that the position of the Scorpion constellation in the spring meant one thing, while the summer triangle in the autumn meant another. His decisions were law because they were based on a deep, unspoken understanding that time was the currency of survival. The historical travelogues of intrepid explorers like the famed Ibn Battuta are filled with anecdotes that underscore this life or death reliance on temporal precision. He wrote of caravans so large they stretched to the horizon, their movement a perfectly synchronized dance across the dunes, all governed by the silent, agreed-upon schedule. He also told harrowing tales of caravans that ignored the warnings of experienced guides and set out too late in the day, only to be caught in an open plain when the sun reached its peak, resulting in heatstroke, lost cargo, and dead animals. These stories were cautionary tales passed down to emphasize that punctuality, in the desert sense, was not about being on time for a meeting, but about being in rhythm with the planet itself. This mastery of time did more than just ensure survival. It was the engine of cultural exchange. When caravans from different regions, Arab, Berber, Sub-Saharan African, Persian, all adhered to this shared understanding of desert time, it created a universal language. A merchant from Damascus and one from Timbuktu might not speak the same tongue, but they both knew that a 3-march journey to a certain oasis had a specific meaning in terms of distance and danger. This shared temporal framework allowed for the precise scheduling of meetings at remote trading hubs like Sigil Mossa or the fabled city of Taghaza, built entirely of salt. Goods, ideas, languages, and innovations all flowed along these routes, synchronized by the movement of the stars and the length of the shadows they cast. The watchful eyes of the desert timekeepers reading the sky above ultimately helped connect the world below, weaving a web of commerce and culture across the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. This deep integration of time into the very fabric of travel and trade finds a powerful, permanent expression in the stone and mortar of the desert empires themselves. Beyond portable instruments and communal signals, these cultures engineered their entire built environment to become a giant, immutable clock, turning architecture into the most public and enduring timekeeper of all. They didn't just build structures to mark time, they designed time itself into the soul of their cities, creating spaces where light and shadow performed a daily dance of divine and practical significance. Consider the awe-inspiring temples of ancient Egypt. Their colossal gateways, towering obelisks, and deep, pillared halls were not randomly aligned. They were precisely oriented to the path of the sun, and particularly to the solar disk god, Ra. The most dramatic example is the great temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak. Its main axis is carefully positioned so that during the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year and a symbol of the sun's rebirth, the rising sun would shine directly through the entrance, its beams traveling down the long, darkened hypostyle hall to illuminate the inner sanctum where the statue of the god resided. For the few minutes this celestial alignment lasted, the priests and pharaoh would be bathed in a transformative light, a visible manifestation of the god's power and favor renewing the world. This was theology written in sunlight and stone, a yearly event that reinforced the pharaoh's divine role as the intermediary between the gods and the people, all choreographed by the impeccable timing of the sun. This tradition of architectural timekeeping was brilliantly adopted and refined within the Islamic world. Many medieval mosques were designed as functional solar observatories to precisely determine the time for the dhuhr, the midday prayer. The key was the mihrab, the niche in the wall that indicates the direction of Mecca. Architects and astronomers would work together to design a mosque so that at the exact moment the sun reached its zenith, a single spear of sunlight would enter through a specially designed window or aperture, often called a time window, and strike a specific point on the mihrab or a line etched on the floor. This event, witnessed by the congregation, was the undeniable signal that the moment for prayer had arrived. There was no need for a timekeeper to make a calculation. The building itself made the announcement, its very structure collaborating with the cosmos to mark a sacred moment. This fusion of faith and science turned the act of worship into a direct engagement with the natural order. For the general public, the most common and accessible architectural timekeepers were the sundials etched onto the walls of mosques, madrasas, and public squares. These were not simple garden ornaments but large, exquisitely crafted mathematical instruments permanently engraved into marble or stone. A typical vertical sundial on a mosque's sun-baked wall would feature a gnomon, a metal rod that cast a shadow, and a fan of carefully calculated lines and curves below it. These lines accounted for the sun's changing altitude throughout the year, allowing the shadow to indicate not just the time of day, but also the season. They were often accompanied by beautiful calligraphic inscriptions, frequently verses from the Quran that reflected on the nature of time, the majesty of God's creation, or the transience of life. A common inscription translated to "Every soul shall taste death," a poignant reminder every time one checked the hour that time itself was a gift and a fleeting resource. These public dials served a vital democratic function, allowing merchants to regulate market hours, citizens to coordinate meetings, and the entire community to synchronize their daily routines with the official time, all for free. The symbolism embedded in these structures is as profound as their practicality. When an entire temple is aligned to a solstice sunrise, it physically and spiritually connects the community to the cosmic cycle, suggesting that human order is a reflection of a greater divine order. A sunbeam striking a mihrab transforms a physical building into a participant in a heavenly event. A sundial on a wall with its religious inscription turns a simple act of checking the time into a moment of contemplation. This is where art, science, and spirituality become completely inseparable. The architect, the astronomer, and the stonemason were all collaborators in creating a lived experience of time that was communal, sacred, and deeply integrated into the environment. They took the vast, impersonal movements of the heavens and made them intimate, local, and meaningful, ensuring that everyone, from the scholar to the street vendor, moved through their day in a shared, harmonious rhythm dictated by the sun's dialogue with their city's very walls. While the precise measurements of astrolabes and the communal calls of the muezzin structured the days and weeks, the true heartbeat of these desert empires was found in the grand, cyclical rhythm of the year itself, marked by seasonal festivals and agricultural celebrations. These were not mere parties, they were the fundamental pillars of society, deeply pragmatic events that synchronized human activity with the unforgiving cadence of nature, all guided by the same celestial timekeeping that informed their daily lives. The entire annual cycle, the promise of rain, the threat of drought, the time to plant and the time to reap, was woven into a vibrant tapestry of ritual and community gathering. Perhaps the most famous example of this is the ancient Egyptian festival of Wepet Renpet, which means the opening of the year. This was not a fixed date on a paper calendar. Instead, it was triggered by the most important event in the Egyptian world, the annual inundation of the Nile. The Egyptians keenly observed the night sky, and they noticed that the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, its first visible appearance just before dawn after a period of absence, coincided almost perfectly with the Nile's gradual rise. This celestial event was their signal. The flooding of the river was not a disaster. It was a divine blessing, depositing rich, fertile silt across the farmlands and ensuring another year of bounty. The festival that marked this occasion was a massive national event filled with processions, offerings to the gods Hapi and Osiris, and feasting. It was a collective sigh of relief and a burst of joy that set the schedule for the entire agricultural year to follow. Once the waters receded, farmers knew it was time to immediately begin sowing their seeds in the freshly prepared soil. Their calendar, and thus their entire livelihood, was literally written in the stars and the river. A similar, though less famous, tradition thrives among the Berber people of North Africa, with their celebration of Yanaya, the Berber New Year. This festival is timed to coincide with the Julian calendar's January 12th, a date that aligns with the winter solstice period and marks the start of the agricultural year. For these communities, Yanaya is a celebration of the land and a prayer for future prosperity. It is a time when families gather to share a special meal, often featuring a whole animal to symbolize abundance, and they perform rituals intended to ensure rain and a good harvest. The timing is everything. It falls after the autumn planting is complete and becomes a moment to pause, celebrate the work done, and hope for the nourishing rains that will allow the seeds to sprout. The festival reinforces social bonds, connects the community to its ancestral lands, and embeds a sense of shared responsibility for the well-being of all through the coming seasons. These festivals did more than just mark a date. They created a powerful, cyclical rhythm that defined existence. Life was not a straight line progressing toward an unknown future, but a circle, a series of predictable and reassuring returns. The same star would always reappear, the river would always rise, the rains would hopefully come again, and the community would always gather at the same time to give thanks and seek favor. This cyclical nature fostered a profound sense of cultural continuity and resilience. The stories told at these festivals, the songs sung, and the rituals performed were passed down through generations, each annual repetition strengthening the collective identity and wisdom of the people. It was a way of ensuring that the hard-learned lessons of survival in a harsh environment were never forgotten. This deep, innate connection to natural cycles invites a powerful reflection for us today. In our modern world, with its 24/7 artificial light, globalized food supply chains, and digital calendars that buzz with reminders, we have largely insulated ourselves from these primordial rhythms. We can eat strawberries in December and work through the night without a thought for the position of the moon. There is incredible freedom and comfort in this, of course. But one might wonder, what have we lost in the process? Have we sacrificed a certain sense of place, a feeling of being an active participant in the turning of the seasons? The ancient Egyptians felt a direct personal stake in the rise of Sirius, and the Nile, their survival, literally depended on it. While we may not face that same stark reality, there is a value in occasionally stepping back to recognize our own place within these larger, natural cycles, to perhaps cultivate a little of that ancient gratitude for the sun that rises and the seasons that turn, regardless of our busy schedules. Nowhere was the precise measure of time more critical than in the bustling, vibrant heart of the desert economy, the marketplace. In the great souks of cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Marrakesh, time was not just a concept, it was a currency, a regulator, and a guarantor of fairness that kept the entire complex engine of trade running smoothly. Imagine the scene, a labyrinth of stalls overflowing with spices, textiles, and precious metals, the air thick with the sounds of haggling and the smells of leather and incense. In this chaotic, thrilling environment, how did a merchant know when the market officially opened? How did a buyer ensure they weren't being rushed into a bad deal? And how did the market inspector, the mutasib, ensure order and collect taxes fairly? The answers all revolved around ingenious, communal timekeeping. The regulation of market hours was often beautifully simple and directly tied to the sun. The official start of the trading day might be announced when the shadow of a specific minaret reached a particular stone in the courtyard. The closing time might be signaled when that same shadow lengthened to touch the base of an opposite wall. This provided a universal, undeniable signal that everyone could see, eliminating disputes. For activities that required strict, equal timekeeping, like auctions, more precise tools were employed. Historical accounts describe the use of small water clocks or even calibrated candle clocks to manage the sale of goods. A merchant might auction a lot of fine silk, for example, and the mutasib would start a water clock. Bidding would be open only for the duration it took for the water to drain from one level to the next, creating a firm and equal opportunity for all interested buyers and preventing the auction from dragging on indefinitely. This system introduced a thrilling element of urgency while upholding a fundamental sense of justice. Beyond the city walls, the entire logistics of desert commerce depended on this shared temporal understanding. The departure of a massive caravan for a 40-day journey across the Sahara was not a spontaneous event. It was scheduled for a very specific window of the year, timed to avoid the deadly summer heat and to ensure arrival at the destination during its own market season. The caravan master's schedule was dictated by daylight. A day of travel was not 24 hours. It was the period from the first usable light before dawn to the moment the sun became too punishing, and then again from late afternoon until the last glow of twilight. This required every merchant in the caravan to have their goods packed, their camels loaded, and themselves ready to move at these precise, naturally defined moments. A single straggler could delay hundreds of people and jeopardize the entire mission. Punctuality in this context was quite literally a matter of life and death. This meticulous temporal organization was also a powerful tool of governance and economic control. The mutasib, acting on behalf of the caliph or sultan, used time to enforce market regulations and collect taxes. He might impose set times for the sale of specific goods, firewood in the morning, bread at midday, and perfumes in the evening, to manage crowd flow and prevent monopolies. Tax collection was often tied to these time periods. A vendor would pay a fee for the right to occupy a space for the duration of the market day, a period defined by the sun's arc. This created a predictable revenue stream for the state and funded public works that, in turn, facilitated more trade, like maintaining the wells that supplied caravans and protecting the roads from bandits. The stability this system provided cannot be overstated. A merchant traveling from Damascus to Cordoba could have a reasonable expectation of when markets would be open, when caravans would depart, and how long a journey should take. This predictability reduced risk, encouraged investment, and fostered the incredible cross-cultural exchange that made the Silk Road and Trans-Saharan routes the internet of their day, flowing not with data, but with goods, ideas, and innovations, all moving to the steady, reliable rhythm of the desert clock. But beneath the precise measurements of water clocks and the careful observations of star risings lay a far deeper and more powerful current, a rich tapestry of myth that gave meaning to the relentless march of time itself. For these cultures, the daily journey of the sun and the monthly cycle of the moon were not merely mechanical processes. They were epic, divine dramas playing out on a cosmic stage. Time was not an abstract measurement. It was a story filled with gods, heroes, and eternal struggles between order and chaos. This mythological framework transformed the frightening randomness of the universe into a comprehensible and sacred narrative, providing the ultimate justification for why they watched the skies so intently and structured their lives so precisely. In ancient Egypt, this story was told every single day with the rise and set of the sun. The sun god Ra was not a distant, static deity. Each dawn, he was reborn as the scarab beetle god Khepri, pushing the sun disk above the eastern horizon. Through the day, he sailed majestically across the sky in his solar bark, a vessel carrying not just light but also the principle of order, known as Mat. But this journey was perilous. As he traveled through the underworld during the night, he faced the ultimate embodiment of chaos and destruction, the great serpent Apep. Every night was a pitched battle. Egyptian priests performed rituals not just to tell time, but to aid Ra in this cosmic conflict. Their chants and offerings were weapons against chaos, ensuring the sun would and could be victorious and rise again the next morning. This meant that the entire Egyptian state, led by the pharaoh who was considered the son of Ra, was engaged in a perpetual, time-bound ritual to maintain the very existence of the cosmos. The rising of Sirius, which signaled the Nile's flood, was seen as the tear of the goddess Isis, mourning her husband Osiris and bringing life back to the land. In this worldview, astronomy, timekeeping, and religion were utterly inseparable. To measure the hour was to participate in divinity. Similarly, in the vastness of the pre-Islamic Arabian desert, the stars were not cold points of light but guides and characters in their own right. The constellation we know as Orion was often called Al-Jabbar, the giant, a mighty hunter forever pursuing the Pleiades star cluster known as Al-Thuraya. In one poetic tradition, Al-Thuraya was a beautiful woman who had risen to the sky to escape his pursuit, and her seasonal appearances and disappearances were woven into tales of love, loss, and destiny. These narratives were memorized and recited around campfires, turning the complex movements of the heavens into a familiar and emotionally resonant epic. A hero setting out on a journey might be described as being guided by the fortune of Al-Thuraya, linking his personal fate to the celestial cycle. This star lore provided a moral and cosmological compass. It explained why things happened. The rains came when a certain star appeared because it was part of a story that had always been true. It justified social structures and rituals. A truce held during a sacred month was not just practical politics, it was obeying a rhythm set by the gods themselves. This intertwining of myth and measurement created a truly holistic understanding of reality. There was no conflict between the scholar calculating the angle of a shadow and the priest reciting a hymn to the sun god. They were two sides of the same coin. The myth provided the why, the profound, emotional reason for maintaining order and measuring time. The scientific observation provided the how, the practical method for doing so. This fusion granted immense authority to both the timekeeper and the ruler. A pharaoh's power was legitimized by his role in Ra's daily battle. and tribal elders' decision to declare the start of a new month based on the crescent moon was respected because it was part of a divine order. The myths made the science sacred, and the science made the myths observable in the world around them. It was a system that satisfied the human need for both reason and wonder, allowing these societies to live in a universe that was not only orderly and predictable, but also filled with meaning, purpose, and divine presence in every shifting shadow and every glittering star. Mastering time in the desert meant constantly wrestling with the environment itself, a relentless adversary that could render the most sophisticated instruments useless in an instant. A brilliant sundial was worthless during a sandstorm that blotted out the sun. A precisely calibrated water clock would freeze solid on a cold desert night or evaporate under the searing midday heat. The very scarcity of water made its use in clepsydry a calculated risk. Yet, these constraints did not halt the pursuit of temporal precision. Instead, they sparked a wave of remarkable ingenuity, pushing desert scholars and artisans to become masters of adaptive design, creating instruments and systems that were as resilient as the people who used them. The need for portability was paramount for scholars, traders, and officials who were always on the move across vast distances. The answer was the portable sundial, a marvel of miniaturization and personal timekeeping. Crafted from wood, brass, or even ivory, these were not simple toys. They were intricate, foldable devices, often small enough to fit in a pouch. Many were designed as rings, with a tiny pinhole gnomon that would cast a spot of light onto an inner scale of hours engraved around the band. Before use, the owner would first determine their latitude using a separate table or a simple quadrant. They would then set the dial accordingly, align it with the sun using an integrated compass, often a magnetized needle floating in a small dish of oil, and read the time from where the light fell. This meant a traveling merchant could pull out his personal dial at any oasis, set it in moments, and know the time with reasonable accuracy, completely independent of any fixed public clock. It was a powerful tool of individual temporal autonomy in an unpredictable landscape. For fixed instruments in public spaces, protection from the elements was key. Sundials mounted on mosques were often placed in deep, recessed niches or under small, shaded arches. This positioning shielded the finely engraved markings from the worst of the weather, blowing sand that could erode the lines or direct rain that could, on the rare occasion it fell, cause damage. More crucially, it protected the timekeeper themselves. A scholar tasked with determining the prayer time could take his measurements in the shade, avoiding the glare and heat that could make precise observation difficult and uncomfortable. In some regions, entire small structures, essentially tiny buildings with a single narrow window, were constructed to house a vertical sundial. This architecture acted as a giant camera obscura, allowing a single beam of sunlight to enter and travel across the calibrated floor, marking the hours with a moving spot of light that was immune to wind and dust. This transformation of a simple instrument into a permanent, sheltered installation guaranteed its reliability for the entire community, day after day, year after year. When instruments failed, the community itself became the backup system. This was perhaps the most resilient adaptation of all. In cultures where timekeeping was woven into social and religious practice, a single point of failure couldn't bring everything to a halt. If a sandstorm obscured the sun for days, making shadow clocks useless, people would already know the approximate time for prayer or market from the previous day's readings and could maintain the rhythm by estimation. The human voice of the muezzin could still call out, even if his timing was based on memory and experience rather than a direct solar observation. The drum networks of the Sahel could still operate as the knowledge of the rhythms was stored in the memory of the griots, not in a fragile device. This distributed communal knowledge base meant that the system couldn't be broken by breaking one tool. The time was kept alive in the shared practices and memories of the people themselves, a truly fail-safe mechanism honed by generations of living in a capricious environment. These adaptations reveal a profound truth about these societies. Their innovation was not driven by an abstract desire for precision for its own sake, but by a deep-seated practicality and resilience. Every design modification, from the foldable dial to the sheltered niche, was a direct response to a real-world problem. They understood their environment intimately and engineered their solutions accordingly, using locally available materials and skills. This continuous process of refinement, making devices more portable, more durable, and more accessible, showcases a relentless human ingenuity in the face of adversity. It proves that necessity is not just the mother of invention, but also its most rigorous quality control tester, forging tools and traditions that were not only brilliant, but also tough enough to survive under the sun's unforgiving gaze. The ingenuity born from the desert's harsh demands did not remain confined to the sands of Arabia or the markets of Baghdad. It became a priceless inheritance for the entire world, seeding advancements that would ultimately revolutionize how humanity measures its existence. The flow of knowledge, facilitated by trade, translation, and conquest, carried these sophisticated timekeeping technologies into medieval Europe, where they ignited a scientific renaissance. The astrolabe, that breathtakingly complex model of the universe perfected by Islamic scholars, was one of the most transformative exports. When it first arrived in European monasteries and courts, it was met with a mixture of awe and intense curiosity. Scholars in places like Toledo, Spain, a vibrant center of cultural exchange where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian thinkers worked side by side, began feverishly translating Arabic manuals and star tables into Latin. These texts, filled with intricate geometric calculations and detailed instructions, were not just copied, they were studied, understood, and built upon. The astrolabe provided European astronomers with a powerful new tool for telling time, calculating planetary positions, and even casting horoscopes. It became the foundational instrument for a new wave of European scientific inquiry, directly challenging the more limited cosmological understandings of the time and paving the way for the navigational breakthroughs of the age of exploration. Beyond the physical instruments, the theoretical frameworks developed by desert astronomers provided the essential mathematical bedrock for future innovation. Islamic scholars' meticulous refinements to the design of sundials and water clocks were particularly crucial. Their deep understanding of mnemonics, the science of sundial design, involved complex spherical trigonometry to account for the sun's changing altitude throughout the year. This wasn't just about drawing lines on a plate, it was about projecting the curved celestial sphere onto a flat surface, a mathematical problem of the highest order. When European clockmakers began their first experiments with weight-driven mechanical clocks in the 13th century, they faced a fundamental challenge: how to regulate the machine to show equal hours throughout the year. The initial solution often involved complex foliate balances, but the ultimate goal was a more precise escapement: the mathematical principles behind the calibrated curves of sophisticated Islamic sundials, which already solved the problem of converting the sun's unequal apparent motion into equal temporal units, provided a crucial conceptual model. Similarly, the intricate gearing systems found in elaborate water clocks described in texts by engineers like Al-Jazari demonstrated the potential for automated timekeeping through complex mechanical sequences. These ideas, transmitted through translated texts and personal contact, planted the seed that would eventually blossom into the mechanical clock, a device that would untether timekeeping from the sky itself. The legacy extends far beyond the ticking of a clock. The astronomical tables, known as Zijs, compiled by great minds like those at the Maraghe Observatory or by Ulugh Beg in Samarkand, were another monumental gift to global science. These tables contained incredibly precise data on the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, calculated over centuries of observation. When European navigators like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus set out to cross uncharted oceans, they relied on celestial navigation. The tools they used, like the mariner's astrolabe and the cross staff, were direct descendants of Islamic instruments, but even more importantly, the data they used to interpret the skies came from those translated Arabic tables. These tables allowed them to determine their latitude at sea with a degree of accuracy previously unimaginable, making transoceanic voyages feasible. It is no exaggeration to say that the globalized world we know today, born from that era of exploration, was navigated using a celestial map first drawn by the astronomers of the desert empires. This profound influence fundamentally challenges a long-held Eurocentric narrative that portrays the history of technology as a straight line of progress originating in ancient Greece and Rome, skipping over a dark age, and then reawakening in the European Renaissance. The story of timekeeping tells a very different tale, one of continuous cross-cultural exchange. The gears of the first mechanical clocks in Europe did not emerge from a vacuum. They were turned by the invisible hand of Islamic mathematics, Persian astronomy, and the relentless drive for precision that defined the clockmakers of the desert. It was a collaborative, international effort spanning continents and centuries. As the historian of science David King aptly noted, the fusion of knowledge from these different traditions was not a simple transfer but a creative synthesis where ideas were adapted, improved, and repurposed. This legacy reminds us that scientific progress has always been a collective human endeavor, a river fed by many tributaries, each essential to the powerful current that drives us forward. This mastery of time, so vital for survival and commerce, was far too powerful a tool to remain solely in the hands of scholars and merchants. In the palaces of caliphs and the tents of tribal chiefs, a profound realization took hold: whoever controlled the clock controlled the people. Timekeeping evolved from a practical science into a potent instrument of political power, a mechanism through which rulers could demonstrate their authority, enforce social order, and shape the very rhythm of an empire. The ability to decree when things happened became one of the most subtle and effective forms of governance, weaving the will of the ruler into the daily lives of every subject. Consider the Abbasid Caliphate at its height in Baghdad, a dazzling center of global power and learning. The Abbasid caliphs, particularly figures like Al-Mamun, were not merely passive beneficiaries of timekeeping, they were its active and lavish patrons. They established the famed House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, which became a magnet for the world's greatest astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers. These scholars were commissioned to build ever more precise water clocks, design complex astrolabes, and compile exhaustive astronomical tables. But this was not philanthropy for the sake of knowledge alone. It was a brilliant political strategy. By positioning themselves as the sponsors of this cutting-edge science, the caliphs portrayed their reign as one of divine enlightenment and unparalleled sophistication. A monumental, beautifully decorated water clock placed at the palace gates was more than a timepiece. It was a symbol of the caliph's unique ability to harness the laws of the universe itself. It sent a clear message: the ruler's wisdom was so vast it could even measure the intangible flow of time, and by extension, his authority was as natural and orderly as the cosmos he commanded. This control over time was exercised with meticulous precision in the administration of the state. The The collection of taxes, the lifeblood of any empire, was tied to rigid temporal schedules. Farmers knew their agricultural taxes, or usher, were due at the very end of the harvest season, a date determined by solar and lunar observations made by the caliph's astronomers. Miss this deadline, and you were not just late, you were in defiance of the state's ordained calendar. Similarly, the legal system operated on the sovereign's time. Court sessions began and ended at specific marks of the shadow clock outside the courthouse. Laws often specified that certain contracts were only valid if concluded before a certain time of day, or that court testimony given after sunset was inadmissible. This gave the state a powerful tool to control the pace of justice, accelerate proceedings against enemies, or delay them for allies. Time, in the hands of the powerful, became a flexible tool to reward loyalty and punish dissent, all under the guise of impersonal, celestial order. The most powerful and pervasive demonstration of this was the regulation of the 5 daily Islamic prayers. While the prayer times are defined by the sun's position, the official declaration of those moments was a privilege tightly controlled by the state. The caliph appointed the muwakkits, the official timekeepers attached to major mosques. These were not just pious men, they were civil servants. Their calculations determined the exact moment for the call to prayer, the adhan. A caliph could subtly influence this for political ends. During a period of unrest, he might instruct the muwakkits to delay the sunset prayer by a few minutes, effectively extending a curfew and keeping people off the streets. Conversely, an earlier call to the dawn prayer could be ordered to start the day sooner for a workforce needed to complete a grand construction project. The muezzin, whose voice rang out across the city, was ultimately following a schedule set by the ruler's employee. This meant the most sacred rhythm of life, the daily dialogue between the believer and the divine, was subtly filtered through the apparatus of the state. The call to prayer, while spiritually uplifting, was also a twice-daily reminder that even access to God was mediated by the caliph's authority. This created a fascinating duality in the nature of time. For the individual, a sundial in a mosque courtyard was a communal resource, a free and accessible tool that allowed anyone to participate in the shared rhythm of the day. But on a macro level, the entire network of these tools and the officials who managed them formed a system of control. The public time signal, whether the call to prayer, a drumbeat, or a visual signal from a hilltop, was a tool for mass synchronization. It could be used to coordinate the simultaneous opening of markets across a province, ensuring a smooth flow of commerce that benefited the state. More ominously, it could be used to mobilize militias or signal the locking of city gates at night. This ability to make thousands of people start or stop an activity at the same moment is a fundamental expression of power. It transforms a population from a collection of individuals into a coordinated body, moving to the rhythm dictated by a central authority. In the deserts of antiquity, the measurement of time was never a neutral act. It was a whisper of order from the throne, a silent partner in the art of rule, proving that the most effective way to govern a society is to first master the clock that ticks in every human heart. While the grand instruments and public time signals were often managed by men in official roles, the intimate, daily rhythm of life was frequently orchestrated by women, whose contributions to timekeeping have been historically overlooked yet were absolutely fundamental to survival and social cohesion. In the vast nomadic cultures of the desert, a woman's expertise was not found in an observatory but in the home and the landscape itself. She was the keeper of a different kind of clock, one that measured the cycles of the body, the family, and the tribe. Her timekeeping was woven into the very fabric of daily existence, a seamless blend of practical observation and deeply held tradition that guided everything from the most personal moments to the largest communal decisions. For nomadic tribes like the Bedouin and the Tuareg, women were often the primary trackers of the lunar cycle, not for navigation, but for its profound connection to fertility, health, and social planning. The 29-and-a-half-day journey of the moon was a natural calendar for the female body, and its phases were closely monitored. The appearance of the new crescent moon could signal the ideal time for certain healing rituals, the preparation of specific foods believed to boost vitality, or the scheduling of important family gatherings like engagements or weddings. This knowledge was passed down from mother to daughter, a sacred science of synchronization between human biology and celestial rhythm. Furthermore, women were keen observers of the stars in relation to seasonal change. While men might use a constellation to guide a camel caravan, a woman would note that the same star's first appearance in the evening sky meant it was time to begin weaving the thicker, warmer textiles needed for the coming winter cold, or to harvest a particular desert plant that was only ripe for a short window each year. Her timekeeping ensured the tribe was prepared, clothed, and nourished, turning the abstract movements of the heavens into a practical schedule for domestic survival. In more settled, urban centers, women's roles, while still often within the household, could involve the operation of sophisticated timekeeping devices. Wealthy households, particularly those of court officials or wealthy merchants, might possess a small domestic water clock or clepsydra. The maintenance and operation of this instrument frequently fell to the women of the household. This was no simple task. It required a meticulous understanding of the device, ensuring the water reservoir was filled with clean water to prevent sediment from clogging the outflow hole, calibrating the flow rate by adjusting the float, and carefully monitoring the water level against the graduated scale to mark the passing hours throughout the day and night. This allowed the household to maintain its own schedule for meals, prayers, and the reception of guests, independent of the public calls from the mosque. In this context, a woman managing the household clepsydra was not just a homemaker, she was a technician, ensuring the smooth and punctual operation of her family's daily life, a role that granted her a quiet but significant form of authority within the domestic sphere. Perhaps the most vital and undervalued contribution was the role of women as living repositories of temporal knowledge through oral tradition. In cultures where literacy was not universal, the collective memory of the community was its library. Elder women, in particular, were the archivists of this knowledge. They held the stories that encoded seasonal patterns, the tale that mentioned a specific flood that happened when a certain star was high, or the song that described a great migration that took place during a period of drought. A grandmother might recall, based on a childhood memory, that the last time a particular pattern of weather occurred was exactly 40 years prior, and would advise the community on what to expect and how to prepare. This was not just anecdote, it was a form of historical data analysis, using narrative as a vehicle for preserving critical information about cyclical events, climatic shifts, and their social consequences across generations. Their memories became a bridge between the past and the future, allowing the community to navigate time not just by looking at the sky, but by listening to the voices of their ancestors. This inclusive perspective reveals that the history of timekeeping is not a single story of technological progress, but a rich tapestry woven from countless threads, where the silent, watchful eyes and the patient, remembering voices of women played a role every bit as essential as the most brilliantly crafted astrolabe. These ancient manuscripts are far more than fragile relics. They are intricate instruction manuals for rebuilding a lost world of thought. Imagine unrolling a 1,000-year-old Egyptian papyrus, its surface covered in precise hieratic script and detailed diagrams of a water clock's internal chambers. Or carefully turning the pages of a thick Arabic codex, its margins filled with complex geometric proofs for calibrating an astrolabe's plates. For decades, even centuries, many of these documents sat silently in library vaults and museum archives, their secrets locked away by fading ink, archaic languages, and sophisticated technical jargon that modern readers struggle to parse. Deciphering them is a monumental detective story, one that requires a rare fusion of skills, part linguist, part historian, part astronomer, and part engineer. The first and most formidable barrier is often the physical state of the document itself. Papyrus can become brittle and fragmented over millennia, while medieval ink, often iron gall-based, can corrode the parchment it's written on, creating holes and making text illegible. This is where modern technology becomes a time machine. Multispectral imaging has revolutionized the field. Researchers can now scan a manuscript using light frequencies beyond the visible spectrum, from ultraviolet to infrared. This process can miraculously cause faded ink to leap off the page, revealing letters and diagrams that have been invisible to the naked eye for centuries. It can also help differentiate between layers of text, where a scribe might have scraped away an older work to reuse the precious parchment, a common practice known as a palimpsest. These advanced imaging techniques allow scholars to recover the original, erased text, sometimes uncovering lost works of science that were thought to be gone forever. Once the text is clearly visible, the real intellectual puzzle begins. The language is often a specialized technical dialect, filled with terms that have no direct modern equivalent. A single word might refer to a specific part of an astrolabe's rete or a particular type of sand used in an hourglass. Translators must therefore be more than just linguists. They need a deep working knowledge of historical astronomy and instrumentation. They cross-reference terms across multiple manuscripts, looking for consistent usage. They also rely on the work of past Islamic scholars who wrote extensive commentaries on earlier texts, effectively creating dictionaries of technical terms for future generations. Modern software aids this process, allowing for the creation of vast searchable databases of digitized texts, making connections that would have taken a lifetime of manual searching to discover. The most thrilling moment comes when the text moves from theory to practical instruction. Some manuscripts provide step-by-step guides for constructing instruments. The 13th century engineer Ismail al-Jazari wrote his famous book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices, which includes incredibly detailed plans for elaborate water clocks and candle clocks, complete with diagrams of gears, floats, and automated figures. Scholars and even modern engineers have taken these centuries-old plans and attempted to build working replicas. This process of experimental archaeology is crucial. It tests the accuracy of the instructions and our understanding of them. Sometimes a modern builder will encounter a problem not mentioned in the text, revealing an assumed level of artisan knowledge that the original author didn't need to write down. Successfully building a functioning device from a 1,000-year-old manual is the ultimate proof that we have truly decoded its meaning, bridging the gap between abstract text and tangible, ticking reality. Beyond the mechanics, these manuscripts open a window into profound philosophical debates that preoccupied these ancient scientists. They weren't just calculating how to measure time, they were wrestling with the question of what time actually was. Was it a linear progression, a constant flow from creation to apocalypse as suggested in some religious contexts? Or was it cyclical and eternal, mirroring the endless rotation of the heavens? Texts often reveal tensions between different schools of thought, between those who saw timekeeping as a purely practical endeavor for scheduling prayers and markets, and those who saw it as a spiritual pursuit, a way to understand the mind of the divine creator through the perfect mathematical order of the cosmos. A single manuscript might move seamlessly from a complex algebraic equation for predicting a planet's position to a poetic meditation on the fleeting nature of a single hour, showing us that for these scholars, the rational and the mystical were not opposing forces, but complementary paths to truth. This painstaking work of reconstruction does more than just satisfy historical curiosity. It actively resurrects a lost chapter in humanity's scientific journey. Each translated manuscript, each reconstructed instrument, forces us to redraw the map of intellectual history. We are continually discovering that pre-modern science was far more advanced, more precise, and more globally connected than we previously believed. The work of these decoders ensures that the legacy of the clockmakers of the desert is not consigned to dusty shelves, but is instead given a new voice, allowing their ingenuity to inspire anew and claim their rightful place in the grand story of human discovery. Now let's step out of the vast, sun-drenched deserts and into the deep, shadowy forests of other ancient empires, because the story of timekeeping takes a fascinating turn when the environment changes. The methods societies developed weren't just about intelligence, they were a direct conversation with their surroundings. While the desert cultures became masters of the sun and stars, empires nestled in the dense woodlands and temperate regions of Europe and Mesoamerica faced a completely different set of challenges. Their canopy of trees often obscured the clear, panoramic views of the night sky that were so vital to desert navigators, and their frequently overcast skies could blot out the sun for days on end, rendering a sundial utterly useless. This fundamental environmental difference forced them to innovate along a separate path, turning inward to harness more controllable elements to mark the passage of time. In the great forests of medieval Europe, the primary solution to this problem was found not in the sky, but in the steady, measurable consumption of a man-made resource, fire. The candle clock became a widespread and essential timekeeping tool. The concept was beautifully simple. A candle of a specific, uniform composition would be marked at regular intervals along its length. As it burned down at a relatively consistent rate, each mark that was consumed would indicate the passage of a set period, perhaps an hour or a watch of the night. These were crucial for regulating the tightly scheduled prayer cycles in monasteries, where monks needed to wake for nocturnal devotions regardless of cloud cover or season. Similarly, in the grand halls of nobility, a marked candle could time the watches of guards or even the duration of a feast. This method, while seemingly crude, represented a significant intellectual leap. It was a form of timekeeping that was manufactured and portable, independent of the whims of the weather. It shifted the paradigm from observing external celestial movements to controlling an internal, predictable chemical process. Water, too, remained a vital tool, but its application in these wetter climates was far less fraught with the paradox of scarcity faced by desert cultures. European water clocks, or clepsydry, could be more elaborate and wasteful, evolving into monumental public spectacles. The most famous example is the elaborate clock designed by the French engineer Bernard de Verdun for the court of Charles V, which not only told the time but also featured moving figures and astronomical displays. Without the pressing need to conserve every drop, these devices could prioritize complexity and showmanship, becoming symbols of civic pride and technological prowess rather than pure survivalist necessity. The driving force here was different. It was less about precise survival scheduling and more about ornamentation, regulation of urban life, and the demonstration of mechanical ingenuity. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Maya civilization in the dense rainforests of Mesoamerica developed one of the most sophisticated and accurate timekeeping systems in the ancient world. yet it was born from a unique blend of celestial observation and mythic cycle that suited their worldview. Their environment presented a challenge. While they were brilliant astronomers who built observatories like the Caracol at Chichen Itza to peer through the forest canopy and track Venus with incredible precision, they also lived in a world where the sun could be hidden for long periods. Their response was to develop a complex interlocking system of calendars. The sacred Tzolk'in cycle of 260 days governed ritual life, while the solar hub of 365 days organized agriculture. But they also used something called the long count, a linear count of days from a mythical starting point, which allowed them to plot historical and future events on a vast scale. This wasn't just about knowing when to plant corn. It was about aligning human activity with the rhythms of the gods and the very cycle of creation and destruction they believed governed the cosmos. This stark contrast in methods, the desert's reliance on the visible heavens versus the forest's dependence on consumed resources like fire and water, beautifully illustrates the core principle of human adaptability. There is no single superior path to measuring time. Instead, each culture crafted its solutions from the materials and conditions most readily available to it. The desert dweller, surrounded by infinite sand and a boundless sky, naturally looked upward to the constants of the cosmos. The forest dweller, surrounded by towering trees and abundant water, looked to the controllable burn of a candle or the predictable flow of a stream. One system was extroverted, based on reading the external universe. The other was more introverted, based on creating a measured, internal process. Both were brilliant. Both were effective, and both reveal that our human quest to understand time is not a linear march of progress, but a sprawling, diverse tapestry of innovation, with each thread colored uniquely by the landscape from which it emerged. Now that we've explored these incredible historical innovations, why not step into the shoes of an ancient timekeeper yourself? You can build your own simple shadow clock or gnomon with items you probably have around the house right now, and it's a fantastic way to truly appreciate the ingenuity of these early scientists. All you need is a straight stick about the length of a ruler, a handful of small stones or pebbles, and a patch of level ground that gets direct, unobstructed sunlight for most of the day. A backyard, a park, or even a sunny balcony will work perfectly. Begin your experiment in the morning, ideally around 8 or 9. Push the stick firmly into the ground so it stands upright on its own. This is your gnomon, the heart of your timepiece. Now here's the crucial part. Take note of where the tip of its shadow falls and place your first stone right on that spot. This is your marker for that specific morning hour. The real magic happens through patience and observation. Return to your clock every 60 minutes throughout the day. Each time, place another stone exactly on the tip of the new shadow position. You'll witness a captivating pattern emerge before your eyes. In the morning, your stones will curve away to the west as the shadows are long. Around midday, they'll cluster close to the base of the stick as the shadow shrinks to its shortest length. Then, in the afternoon, the stones will begin to curve out towards the east as the shadows stretch long once more. By sunset, you'll have a full, semicircular arc of stones tracing the sun's journey across your local sky. A quick and important safety note: if you're doing this on a bright day, be sure to wear a hat and sunscreen, as you'll be spending short bursts of time in direct sunlight. Also, choose a spot away from foot traffic so no one trips over your experiment. Now, for the interpretation. This curve of stones is your personal sundial. If you were to do this over several days, you would notice that the shadow touches each stone at roughly the same time each day. This means that once you've calibrated your curve, you can use it to tell the time on any subsequent sunny day. Just observe where the shadow's tip falls in relation to your stones for a rough estimate of the hour. It won't be as precise as your smartphone, of course, because the sun's path changes slightly with the seasons, but that's part of the lesson. This simple activity connects you directly to the daily reality of ancient cultures. You're reading time exactly as they did, using the same fundamental principles of light and geometry. It transforms an abstract historical concept into a tangible, personal experience, giving you a genuine feel for the sun's rhythm and a deep respect for the first astronomers who turned this simple observation into the foundation of measured time. But beyond the gears of power and the practicalities of survival, the very act of measuring time in these ancient societies forces us to confront some of the most profound ethical and philosophical questions a culture can ask itself. Who gets to own time, and what does our relationship with it say about our place in the universe? For the desert empires, timekeeping was never a neutral technology. It was a force that could either reinforce social walls or, in its most equitable forms, help to dismantle them. The very architecture of time had a moral dimension. Consider the public sundial etched into the wall of a bustling mosque courtyard. This was time as a communal resource, freely accessible to all, the wealthy merchant, the humble water seller, and the traveling scholar alike. Anyone could stand before it and read the same shadow, synchronizing their day with the rest of the community. This public ownership of time fostered a remarkable social equity, creating a shared rhythm that everyone moved to, regardless of their status or wealth. It was a powerful democratizing force, yet this accessibility existed in a constant tension with the tools of control. The sophisticated astrolabe, the complex water clock in the caliph's palace, these were instruments of elite knowledge. They required years of study to build, calibrate, and interpret. This created a natural hierarchy of timekeeping, where a scholarly or priestly class acted as the gatekeepers of the most precise temporal knowledge. This expertise granted them immense social and political influence, as we've seen, but it also risked creating a divide. The common person experienced time through public signals and natural cycles, while the ruling and intellectual classes could access a more precise, private, and potent form of time that allowed for long-term planning and control. This duality is a mirror to our own age, where the most advanced algorithms and data that shape our daily lives are often locked away in digital black boxes, controlled by a new technological elite. The ancient struggle over who controls the clock is a story that continues to play out in the modern world, just with different tools. This leads us to a deeper philosophical chasm between their world and ours, the fundamental nature of time itself. For most modern, industrialized societies, time is overwhelmingly linear. We see it as an arrow shot from the past through the present and into a future we are constantly racing toward. Our digital calendars stretch forward in an endless grid of appointments and deadlines, and we measure progress as a straight line of growth and achievement. This linear perspective can create a relentless pressure to produce, to optimize, and to constantly look ahead, often at the expense of the present moment. But for many desert cultures, time was experienced as something profoundly cyclical. The sun rose and set, the moon waxed and waned, the seasons turned, and the great annual festivals returned year after year, generation after generation. This was not a circle of repetition in a monotonous sense, but a spiral of return, a rhythm of renewal. This cyclical view fostered a relationship with the natural world that was inherently more sustainable. You did not simply extract resources from the land, you lived within its rhythms. You planted when the stars said to plant, you harvested when the sun dictated, and you migrated when the seasons changed. This created a built-in restraint, a patience that was woven into the fabric of time itself. There was a time for every action under heaven, and to act outside of that time was not just inefficient, it was a violation of the natural order, a form of hubris that could invite disaster. Compare this to our modern 24/7 artificial rhythm, where global supply chains allow us to harvest and consume anything at any time of year, and where electric light banishes the natural rhythm of night and day. Our linear, forward-charging model of time has undoubtedly brought incredible material progress, but it has also severed us from those stabilizing cycles, contributing to a sense of perpetual haste and a disconnect from the environmental costs of our constant activity. Ancient thinkers were deeply preoccupied with these questions, while they didn't leave us tidy philosophical tracts on the ethics of timekeeping. Their views are embedded in their poetry, their myths, and their scientific pursuits. The Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, though not from a desert culture, captured a sentiment that would have resonated deeply with the Bedouin astronomer gazing at the stars when he wrote, "Time is a river of passing events, and strong is its current." This reflects the idea of time as a powerful, flowing force that carries all things along with it. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, the prolific scholar al-Biruni, whose work we've mentioned, expressed awe at the mathematical perfection of the universe, seeing in the precise cycles of the heavens a reflection of a divine, eternal order. For him, to measure time was to engage in an act of reverence, to better understand the mind of the Creator through the flawless mechanics of creation. These perspectives invite us to step back from the frantic tick of our digital clocks and ponder a much larger reality. Is time a resource to be managed and spent, or is it a dimension to be experienced and lived within? The clockmakers of the desert, in their silent dialogue with the cosmos, might have argued for the latter, offering us a timeless invitation to reconsider our own hurried place in the great, turning wheel of the universe. For centuries, the incredible achievements of the desert clockmakers were known only through fragmented texts and decaying instruments in museum cases, their full story waiting just beneath the sands. But right now, we are living in a golden age of discovery, where archaeologists are literally rewriting history books with astonishing finds that are bringing this ancient ingenuity back to light in vivid detail. The deserts themselves, once barriers to exploration, have become vast, pristine archives, preserving secrets for millennia that are now being revealed through a combination of old-fashioned digging and breathtaking new technology. Take the recent work in Oman, a land of dramatic mountains and endless dunes. Here, a team excavating a medieval Islamic settlement unearthed a sandstone slab that, at first glance, looked like any other piece of rubble. But when they brushed away the dust, they found an exquisitely carved horizontal sundial, complete with carefully incised lines and an Arabic inscription dedicated to its purpose, marking the times of prayer. This wasn't just a crude marker, its geometry was sophisticated, calibrated for the specific latitude of that village. The gnomon, the part that casts the shadow, was missing, likely a separate metal piece that had long since corroded away. But the precision of the engraving told a powerful story. It proved that accurate timekeeping wasn't confined to great cities like Baghdad or Cairo. Even a remote desert community had the knowledge and the craftsmanship to create a precise scientific instrument, integrating faith and science into the very stones of their daily lives. Perhaps even more exciting are the discoveries being made without anyone even lifting a trowel. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar are acting like X-ray vision for archaeologists, allowing them to peer beneath the desert surface to spot anomalies and patterns invisible to the human eye. In North Africa, researchers using these techniques identified the faint outline of what appeared to be a large, circular structure buried near a known Roman-era trading post. A targeted excavation revealed the foundations of a massive public timekeeping platform, a giant sundial complex designed to serve an entire caravan stop. This find was a revelation. It showed that time was a communal utility on these trade routes, a service provided to ensure the smooth coordination of hundreds of merchants and their goods, proving that temporal precision was considered essential infrastructure for the economy of the desert. But the stars of the show are often the astrolabes. While many beautiful examples have been in museums for years, new finds are constantly adding chapters to their story. A few years ago, a metal detectorist working with archaeologists in Tunisia discovered a small, battered brass disc. After careful conservation, it was revealed to be an incredibly rare early Islamic astrolabe from the 9th century. What made it a once-in-a-lifetime find were the inscriptions. It featured not only the standard Arabic markings, but also later additions in Hebrew and Western numerals, scratched into the metal by different hands over centuries. This single object had clearly traveled vast distances, passing from culture to culture, each owner adapting it for their own use and latitude. It is a physical record of scientific exchange, a testament to how knowledge transcended political and religious boundaries, handed from Muslim to Jewish to Christian scholars in a continuous chain of learning and adaptation. The real thrill comes from talking to the archaeologists on the front lines of these digs. Dr. Hannah Jacobs, a leading researcher in the field, describes the moment of discovery as an electric connection across time. She recalls the painstaking process of cleaning a mud brick wall in Jordan, slowly revealing a painted diagram that turned out to be a calibration chart for a water clock, its instructions and measurements still clearly visible. For her, this wasn't just an artifact, it was a direct message from the instrument's maker, a set of instructions left behind to ensure its operation would be understood 1,000 years later. This kind of find moves us beyond guessing how these devices worked. It shows us, in their own words and drawings, the meticulous care and mathematical understanding they employed. Every one of these discoveries does more than just add to a collection. It fundamentally shifts our perspective. A newly analyzed inscription might reveal that a certain type of sundial was invented centuries earlier than previously believed. The study of wear patterns on an astrolabe's moving parts can tell us how often it was used and for what specific calculations. This ongoing research is a powerful reminder that history is not a static set of facts in a textbook. It is a dynamic, living field, constantly being refined and rewritten with every shard of pottery, every engraved line, and every satellite image. The legacy of the desert clockmakers is not a closed book. It is an active excavation, with every new find adding another brilliant piece to the puzzle of our shared human past. Yet the legacy of these ancient rhythms extends far beyond the calendar on a wall or the timing of a festival. It pulses at the very heart of spiritual practice for over 1 billion Muslims around the world. The 5 daily prayers, or Salah, remain inextricably tied to the sun's position, a direct and unbroken link to the earliest desert timekeepers. While a Muslim today might use a digital app to get an alert for Dhuhr prayer, that notification is generated by a complex astronomical calculation of the sun's zenith. The very same principle a 9th century Muwaqit would have used with his astrolabe. The month of Ramadan, Islam's holiest period of fasting and reflection, is perhaps the most powerful global example of lunar timekeeping in action. Its commencement and conclusion hinge entirely on the confirmed sighting of the crescent moon, a practice that still creates a thrilling, communal anticipation. News channels and religious authorities wait for verified reports from moon sighting committees, often using modern telescopes alongside the naked eye, blending ancient tradition with contemporary technology. This creates a beautiful, tangible connection to the past, the same celestial event that guided a Bedouin caravan 1,000 years ago now dictates the daily rhythm of life for a family in Jakarta, London, or Chicago, creating a global community synchronized by the moon. This enduring connection to traditional time is also a profound statement of cultural identity and resilience, especially for nomadic peoples like the Tuareg of the Sahara. In an era of smartphones and satellite navigation, they continue to organize major cultural gatherings, like the annual festival in the desert or various seasonal courtship festivals, according to stellar patterns and lunar cycles. The timing might be announced not through social media, but through oral networks, with a date set for when a specific star is visible in the evening sky. For these communities, maintaining this practice is an act of defiance against cultural homogenization. It is a way of saying, our ancestors' knowledge still has value, our way of seeing the world is still valid. It roots their celebrations not in an arbitrary date on a Gregorian calendar, but in the very environment they call home, reinforcing a unique identity that is tied to the land and the sky above it. This isn't about rejecting modernity, but about selectively integrating it while fiercely protecting a cultural heritage that offers a different, more cyclical and nature-oriented perspective on time itself. We can even find echoes of this desert wisdom in our modern language and our growing yearning for a different pace of life. The very word zenith, which we use to describe the peak of anything, comes directly from the Arabic term samt ar-raz, meaning the path above the head, a phrase used by medieval astronomers to describe the sun's highest point. More profoundly, the modern wellness movement's emphasis on circadian rhythms and living in sync with natural light and dark cycles is a scientific rediscovery of a principle that was second nature to desert societies. Their entire existence was built around harmonizing with these rhythms, resting during the heat of the day, being active during the cool hours, and allowing the seasons to dictate the pace of work and celebration. In a world suffering from the burnout of 24/7 artificial schedules, this ancient wisdom feels not primitive, but remarkably advanced and desperately needed. It suggests that the ultimate luxury might not be saving time, but savoring it, and that the most accurate clock was never on our wrist, but always hanging in the sky, waiting for us to look up and rediscover its timeless, steady beat. And so our journey across the sands of time draws to a close, leaving us not at an end, but at a point of reflection. We began by imagining a world without clocks, and through the eyes of the desert empires, we discovered they never needed them in the way we think they did. Their story is a profound testament to human ingenuity, a brilliant narrative woven from the very fabric of their environment. They looked up at the boundless, starry sky and saw a cosmic clock. They felt the sun's heat and saw a dial. They walked on endless dunes and found in the very sand a material for hourglasses. They didn't conquer time with gears and pendulums. They conversed with it, using shadows, stars, and sand to build systems of breathtaking sophistication and beauty. What emerges most powerfully is their incredible adaptability. Faced with the harshest of environments, where a mistake in timing could mean catastrophe, they turned constraints into catalysts for innovation. The scarcity of water led to the paradox of the clepsydra, a testament to how vital they considered measured time. The relentless sun gave birth to the gnomon and the sundial, while the clear night skies became a celestial library, its contents memorized in epic poetry and star lore. They engineered their architecture to capture solstice sunbeams and designed portable astrolabes that condensed the universe into the palm of a hand. Every solution was a dialogue with their world, a masterclass in observing and harnessing the natural order rather than trying to overpower it. This was more than just practical science. It was a philosophy embedded in daily life. Their time was cyclical, not linear, a rhythm of returning seasons, lunar months, and celestial events that fostered a deep, sustainable connection to the world around them. Time was not a resource to be spent and depleted, but a cycle to be inhabited and respected. This perspective was woven into their myths, their rituals, their markets, and their governance, creating a holistic understanding where measuring a shadow was both a scientific act and a participation in a cosmic, divine drama. They mastered time not by segmenting it into ever smaller, abstract units, but by understanding its place in the grand, turning wheel of existence. The legacy of these clockmakers of the desert is all around us, often in ways we no longer see. The astrolabe in a European museum, the algorithmic calculation behind a prayer time app on your phone, the very word zenith in our language, these are all threads connecting us to their genius. They handed down not just instruments, but the foundational mathematics and astronomical principles that would eventually fuel the scientific revolution and guide explorers across oceans. Their story challenges a narrow view of history, reminding us that the path of human progress is a sprawling, interconnected tapestry, rich with contributions from diverse cultures. Perhaps their greatest gift to us today is an invitation to reconsider our own relationship with time. In our world of atomic precision and digital notifications, we have gained incredible efficiency but risk losing a vital connection. We live by artificial beats, often feeling ruled by the clock rather than in harmony with it. The ancient desert way offers a different path, a reminder to occasionally look up from our screens and track the sun's arc, to notice the phase of the moon, to appreciate the slow, patient turn of the seasons. It inspires a more sustainable tempo, one that values rhythm over rush and quality of moments over quantity. They teach us that time is not just something to be measured, but something to be experienced, a profound and beautiful mystery that humanity has always sought to understand. Thank you for joining this exploration into how empires without hours still found all the time